So for those of you who don't know and we haven't met, I am the art professor at Thomas University. I'm Rich Curtis, and this is a virtual drawing class, drawing a landscape. I happen to be out in, I am in a park. Actually, you could probably hear the traffic behind me. What's funny is this may be a park. I'll turn the camera around and you can kind of see where we are. This is McIntyre Park in Thomasville, but right behind me is a street, so you may hear traffic and some construction going on. So it's kind of funny to think about, you know, if you think of your favorite landscape painting and, you know, if there was a freeway right behind the Van Gogh when he was painting Starry Night or something, it would be kind of what we're doing here. So it's kind of funny to think about, you know, what the context for these paintings are. But we have a beautiful view. We might see some Frisbee golfers in the background, which is fine. We don't have to paint them or draw them. We're going to be talking about landscape, and I'm actually going to hand it off. My wife is here. I'm going to hand it off. I'm going to turn the camera around, and I'm going to say a few things and kind of give an overview of landscape painting and composition. But first, I wanted to make sure to give a shout out to Karen Harvey, and you should have seen her email about this is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and there's a lot of live virtual events online if you go to earthday.org. She sent out the link to that, and I would really encourage everybody to do something like we're doing right now, which is celebrating the Earth in many different ways, and doing whatever we can in whatever way we can, given our current circumstances, you know, how we can impact the way we live on the Earth. So it just happened to be that this was the day that I picked to do this, and it just happened to be Earth Day, so it's a wonderful coming together of these ideas. So thank you, Karen, for reminding us of that, and I also wanted to just say thank you to all of you for being here. All right, so just to kind of give you a sense of when I'm thinking about a composition for a landscape, this diagram that you see, and I actually have a photo of this, and I can send it to you as a JPEG to your email if you want. So you can put it in the chat, and I can try to send you the JPEG of this. But I wanted to show you a quick sort of composition that was really developed by a guy named Claude Lorraine. He was a French artist. He really developed the art of, he really elevated the art of landscape painting. Before then, landscapes were not really the subject of real, you know, high art. But until then, when he came along, he really elevated it. And so he showed, first of all, we think of the composition of a landscape in terms of the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. And so the foreground is really, that's where the viewer is. So this X is sort of, you know, no matter what the painting is, the viewer is always some person standing right outside of that composition looking into this imaginary window. And when you're looking at a painting, there's often the use of some kind of a framing device, whether it's a tree. Claude Lorraine was always, he was very emphatic that it had to have a tree, it had to have some body of water, and it had to have some like a cliff or a classical ruin, like as if you were looking at the ruins of an ancient Greek city. You would see some reference to that off in the distance. And these were not plein air. These were not painted in nature like the later Impressionists. So he could do these fantastical landscapes. But he used this framing device to create the way to focus the attention to really this area right in here, the middle ground. And I kind of show that it's not exact. There's not an exact rule of thirds, but in principle, you want to think of your composition as a rule of thirds, both horizontally and vertically. So you have the foreground, middle ground, background. You also have the left, middle, and right thirds. And where these lines intersect, that's really, you want to have some point of interest in at least one of them. So when you think about a composition that is asymmetrical, that means it's not bilaterally symmetrical like a butterfly. When you think of like a scene that you're painting, there's often a lot of asymmetry going on. So you want a point of interest somewhere in one of these 4 points, slightly off center so that it draws the eye away. You want kind of an area of focus that is almost looking through the frame of some kind of maybe vegetation or a tree, and it's kind of drawing your eye in and then leading you up to the horizon line. So the horizon line is here, and I really put a range of horizon because often you can't necessarily see the exact line unless it's like a seascape. You can kind of see the horizon exactly, but there's often like a tree line or something obscuring it, and so you have this kind of range of a horizon, and then the sky that leads your eyes back down into the movement, the action of the painting. So all of this movement, this eye movement, is really what makes for a good composition. And so I've really set up what I think for an artificial landscape here. It's a man-made, natural-looking landscape. I have over here, of course, a body of water, this kind of babbling brook that's snaking its way into the distance. I have this tree over here with some Spanish moss, very South Georgia, and it's kind of coming in, swooping in, framing all of this. And as you're looking through these trees coming up and kind of creating, and those roots are really interesting. So I wanted to make sure to get those in the composition. So, and then you see a distant, maybe a little bridge over there. So there is this tension between the natural world and the man-made world that exists, and I think it's pretty appropriate for Earth Day, considering our own impact on the Earth. Like, that's a perfect example of how, you know, the synthetic and the natural sort of coexist in different ways in all of our lives. So this is the composition I wanted to try to draw today, and I wanted to kind of give you that background just so you have an appreciation for what we're doing. And are there any questions? I'm going to take this here. I'll turn the camera back around and ask if there's any questions. Or did everybody follow that or hear me? Right? Good.
Are we going to try to do that?
Yet.
Are we going to try to do that landscape in a landscape position or in a portrait position? Because your phone's kind of in the portrait.
That's a great question. I am going to, my paper will be in landscape, and I will be drawing in landscape form. It's funny, on my phone, it's better for me to see what I'm doing in portrait on the phone, but not necessarily when I'm looking at you guys. It's actually easier to turn portrait. So it's a weird function of the.
We cannot have any.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I was talking to the cat.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
I didn't realize my mic was on.
That's okay.
He was wanting some of my chips.
Well, by all means. Well, great. So I will, what I'm going to do is turn the camera back around. I will flip it horizontally or portrait, and I'm also, I have a little rig where it will rest on my chest, and then I'll start doing, I'm going to be using charcoal.
I did notice that you have an outline there on that's in dotted line. And I was wondering what it was you were trying to accomplish with that dotted line.
You mean around the areas, you know, around here?
Yes, yeah.
That was just a sense of, again, the idea of framing. So that could
Okay.
be, I was just making the note that on the sides, on either side, it's kind of framing the eye with either some kind of a foliage or tree or something. And this is, again, a Claudian landscape. So this is a very classical version of a landscape. When the Impressionists came along and they were painting outdoors, they didn't really adhere to all of these rules. So a lot of them just painted like farmland, or like you think of Monet's haystacks, or just like a barren field with 3 giant haystacks or something like that. It was more about looking at the light than it was the composition. So anyway, I'm going to flip I've got this fun rig here, and this is a work in progress.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's let's see if I can make this happen here. I've got to use rubber bands to keep it on.
Hey, now that's high tech.
That's right. That's whoops. All right, so now we are on. I'm going to flip the camera back around. You see the paper, and you see the landscape. And so I'm going to get started. And so I have some charcoal and some other things here. Let me see. Get this ready. All right. So the first thing I want to do is look at the landscape itself. So, and if you're following along at home, feel free to do your own kind of landscape or just follow what I'm drawing. You can use these ideas out in your own backyard or wherever you are. These are just some general principles and you can just kind of follow along like we did with the portrait. It can just be a sort of a jumping off point for you. So what I typically do is start with the horizon line. When you think about the horizon line, that's basically your eye level. And so that's what the horizon line represents. And I typically put it about 1/3, so backing up so you can kind of see the paper, putting it about 1/3 of the way down from the paper. So doing that, and because I'm using charcoal, I'm going to be very probably be darker than yours, but you can use a pencil very lightly to just make a note of the horizon line. So I'll back up a little bit, and then in the foreground, there's a tree right there. So I'm just going to make a line right now to show the tree. And the other cool thing is you don't have to, if you don't like something in the landscape, it's not a rule that you have to paint it. So if a tree doesn't look right, you can make it look different. It's all inspiration. It's not you're not making a photograph. This is an inspiration for your own creativity. My drawing is going to look much different probably from yours because I'm using charcoal as opposed to pencil, but that's okay too. So having this framing device of this tree off to one side is, whoop. The other thing is you drop your charcoal sometimes, so let's pick up another piece. So you have your horizon line. Let me see if I can, there we go. Okay. Horizon line, beginning of the frame, you have your tree over here. And just like using the side of the charcoal, you can use the side of the pencil point. So if I have a pencil, you can use the lead point and really go to the side of it and really make some nice shading like we did with a face. If you were there for that one, that makes it much easier to shade if you're using a pencil. So the other part that I need to address is the area over here has all those nice roots. So I'm just gonna, you notice I'm just putting in some very basic lines. I'm not trying to draw everything exactly as I see it just at once. I'm building up layers of detail, starting with very basic shapes. So this, I'll show you what I'm looking at. That area here with the roots and this tree coming up, that's what I want to put. I'll back up here, show you. That's what I want to put here. So this is this little nubbin with the roots will be in there. And that tree, the tree that forks right there, it's fun to go back and forth trying to point these things out and look at them at the same time. So there's this tree. The other tool, of course, that is always handy is the eraser. If you can get a large white eraser like this, it's really handy. Whether you're doing pencil or charcoal, it's good to have, because if you build up a really dark area, you can smear it with your finger, but you can also lift off some of that, as you know, with an eraser. It's really a handy tool. It's not just for correcting mistakes, but it's also about, it can become a blending tool, so creating shade. All right. So yeah, I've got this area here, and from the other thing you can think about is not only what is in the composition, what is in the picture, but what is outside the picture coming in. So you notice here, there's the roots, but then there's this nice area here that's coming in from off camera, if I'm looking at it from a camera's point of view. And so looking at the drawing, here's the roots, but here's that cliff, that kind of indention. This is where the stream is coming in into the foreground, this area closest to me. So yeah, with photography, you kind of take for granted that the things that are down here are closest to you, and the things up here are further away. But it's kind of understood in a landscape that the further away, the higher up on the piece they are. So we'll get this. That's not really exact either yet. I'm just kind of blocking in the shapes. There is also, looking over there, you can kind of see the and if you would like me to, I'm happy to show the actual landscape. If you want to try drawing it with me, that's fine. I can just shut up and show you the a picture of the actual landscape for a little bit. Trying to back up and give you a sense of what I'm doing here. Because this tree is on my bank, as you can kind of see. Where is that thing? There it is. So yeah, the tree is on my bank, and then across the bank is that shrubbery. Trying to get everything so you can kind of see as you begin to build this where things will land. So there's and I have a bunch of trees to choose from, and I don't have to draw all of them. You don't have to draw every single thing that you see in the landscape. I really like this tree here that forks, and I like the a couple of the trees next to it. This one's nice because it kind of leans the other way. So you have this leaning tree and that leaning tree, but you don't have to draw every single thing. And once it gets to the background, you can really just create indications of shapes. You don't have to be very detailed because when you're looking at it like a photograph, you think about the middle ground is really that focal point is really in focus in a photograph, and then the rest is kind of out of focus. So you can kind of create that sense of distance by actually drawing things out of focus if you want. So I'm going to, it's a fun trick to try to draw with this thing around my neck and get the right angle for you and for me. It's fun.
It can't be easy to work around.
It's a learning process. Obviously, I'm not doing it completely successfully, but I'm trying here.
You're doing pretty good.
Well, thank you. That's good to hear, because it's hard to know what I'm what's in frame and what is. So there we go. Great. So, and then this tree, I'm just going to focus on these three trees. You know, obviously this one frames the right side, but these three are kind of in the middle ground right here. So these three trees, there are more than that, as you can see, but I like odd numbers a lot of time.
Focus.
And so I'm backing up again, reminding myself.
Nice.
So just to, that gives you a sense of the different scale. And then there's other little details like the bush on the background and that far area that, whoop, if I can keep it in frame here. And I may need to adjust the horizon line. Like this was my original horizon line, but that seems a little low. I actually probably need it up about here. So I'm going to try to adjust that. And that's okay. That's why we work in pencil and charcoal, because it's very easy to correct mistakes or to modify what you're doing, because it's all a process. It's all learning. I'm going to try to pull my paper down a little bit too. Does anybody have any questions, or are they totally lost, or? Everything good?
Looks good to me.
All right. Over here, there's some beautiful fern kind of growing in this area. And again, you just notice I'm just doing very loose shapes to kind of get the very basics down first before we start doing more details. Then I'm also fighting gnats, so this is nice too. One of the pleasures of being outside are the gnats and the humidity. So,
Especially in South Georgia.
yes, the gnats and the skeeters and everything. So that's good. Oh, broke it off again. Okay. So has anybody participated in an Earth Day event today? Like, Karen, have you done anything online or seen any events online that you?
No, and no, I really haven't done anything yet.
Okay. It's still early.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, with the parts of the country that are 3 hours behind us, there's going to be stuff on into the night. So that's great. All right, so just backing up a little bit to kind of give you a picture of the whole thing and trying to be still so I don't make you sick. Okay. And what we did last time that I really loved is everybody holding up their finished product to the camera so we could see it. So I can't wait to see what you guys came up with. They're whether they look like a landscape on this this planet or some other planet, that's okay. you can have like Dr. Seuss looking trees or whatever. That's I know the Facebook post that Cindy sent out said he's no Bob Ross, but I do adhere to that happy little tree mantra and the his idea that, you know, it's your landscape. It can be whatever you want. You know, it can have all sorts of strange things. So now you notice I'm doing a little more detail, looking a little more closely at the landscape and all of those little details. These are the roots that I am really excited about. And keep dropping my stuff. But, so the more defined, the more detailed that you're getting, the darker and the more the harder you can press. Like for me, using charcoal, the darker I'm going to get, the more definite that I want to make those marks. And then as I'm still working things out, because it is a process, the lighter I'll go. So, and I'm really I'm not a pure plein air drawer or painter. I'm not interested in the way I love the way the light plays off of objects, but I'm not a stickler for making it look exactly the way I find it, because oftentimes, you know, there are things that I would want to change in the landscape, and that's okay. So, so you'll often find me exaggerating certain aspects of a tree or anything like that. And if you do have a question or any comment, you're welcome to just unmute yourself and ask away, and I'll, because I don't know that I'll be able to see it in the chat box. So the second layer of this, now that you kind of have the lines, is to think in terms of shapes. So I'm looking at this bank over here and noticing the shape, the really strong shape of this bank, and this area here, these kinds of chunks of shapes, and trying to fill those in, just to again show how it works compositionally, how it works structurally, and then the details kind of take care of themselves. Like this bush should be much larger, actually. And I'll try to back away so you can see more of it. Back away and come closer at the same time. It's a fun trick. So I'm using the charcoal to make darker areas, to make things sort of come to life. And so this bush, notice I'm not trying to draw every leaf. I'm just trying to get the general shape. It's far enough in the background that it's not necessary to get every single little leaf. It's almost like scribbling. You can kind of scribble leaf shapes using a to make a lot of light and dark areas. So, all right. I'm gonna rub away that line because that doesn't really make any sense right now. Although there is that area. Well, never mind. It's shaping up. There's also kind of a line that comes down here. This, you can kind of see how it comes off of that bush and just kind of, so there's some really nice, the way the landscape just kind of undulates is really beautiful, and you can just kind of make these swooping lines. I make a lot of sounds when I draw. Meow.
That's what makes it fun.
Yes, absolutely.
I remember watching Bob Ross, and I made a lot of noises when I was following along with his paintings.
Yeah. It's so funny. When I was an art student, I of course was a snob and would never admit to watching Bob Ross. But
Yeah.
as I've matured, I actually see how, I mean, his paintings are what they are, but just how technically good he was at pushing paint around and being a painter, and I also read that he would actually make 3 of every painting. So he would make 1 as a practice, 1 as a finished product that they would photograph, and then the one that he was doing on camera. And he could churn out 3 of the same picture, almost identical.
I think he was a sergeant in the military and decided that he didn't want to yell at people anymore, so he used a soothing voice.
That would make sense. Yeah, seems like that makes. Seems like I remembered something about that. Yeah, how right. And I know he was a very devout person, and that informed his life a lot. And so he's a more interesting character than a lot of people give him credit for. And now you can get a chia pet of his head at Cracker Barrel.
Oh, that would be great.
I've still got, I heard about him like a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, I've got to get one of those. So I think when we come back, hopefully in the fall, I'll have a chia pet growing for in the studio.
That sounds wonderful.
Oh, I'm way off camera. I'm sorry. All right. I keep looking at the paper and notice that I'm like taking a picture of the ground. So this tree here is actually that one. So the ground kind of comes up and obscures the roots of that one. Whoop. And it's a little bit darker. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of shade this one in a little bit. Not too much, just to give it a little shadow. I'm sure you can hear the traffic behind me. That's what's fun about being right by the road.
It's not too bad.
Okay, well that's good. There's also some construction in the house across the street, so they'll do some sawing. It'll all right. So the Babbling Brook, I'll kind of get that into that now. I'll kind of walk over and just kind of show you what I'm looking at. And you kind of see this very, very beautiful area. And so this area in my paper is where I want to kind of introduce some of that. So I'll begin just kind of making the basic shape of the kind of S curve of the water. And again, very lightly at first. And don't worry if your drawing looks nothing like this. That's not important. Again, I'll try to back up to give you a little better sense of what I'm doing. Whoop. So once you have all of the basic shapes laid in, with a few exceptions, just kind of, once you have it to kind of this point and you have your basic design, you may add in another tree here and there. Like this is a pretty blank area. So I may add the indication of a tree. But really, it becomes about drawing the dark and the light. So really paying attention to how shadows mold the shapes and create that sense of depth. One of the things you may not think about when you're looking at a picture is that generally the things that are closer to you are a little bit darker, and they get lighter and more sort of out of focus as you move away. So thinking in terms of the dark, rich tones in this area. So really, when you're drawing, making sure that your shadows are really nice and rich here, really dark shadows, and then a little lighter. And then once you get out here, you can kind of give the indication of some something going on. There may be a tree line might be, if you were doing a tree line, that might be in contrast to the general lightness of the rest of it. So I'll say, like, if I just wanted to finish off the tree line, make it look like there's basically some vegetation back here, but sorry. It's like I need a spotter or something to say, hey, you're on. That may help the kind of give, this is again the thinking in terms of the horizon line. And this is just one technique for drawing landscapes. If I was painting, it would be a totally different thing. I would actually lay in the background first and then start doing the shapes and come forward, rather than sort of starting forward and going backwards. So it's depending on the tool that you're using, you have to do different, think in different ways. You think backwards sometimes. All right, but you can kind of see as I step back that the composition is shaping up. The emphasis of those trees and the little babbling brook background. So it's almost, once you get to this point, it's less about most of what you're focusing on in nature when you're drawing from nature is blocking in these shapes, for me anyway. And now it's just a matter of making the drawing look good. So I'm going to add details, starting with this original, this first tree. I want to get really nice and specific about the bark. You might even come over and look at the bark and kind of see. And there's some nice Spanish moss hanging off of it. Does anybody, what tree is this? What kind of tree is this? And I'm showing you the leaves. I don't know if anybody can tell what kind of tree it is.
It's hard to tell.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a beautiful tree. So makes a nice shady place. And but this bark is really interesting. And so if you're using a pencil, you can begin to use more of the point of the pencil rather than the side of the pencil, and getting some of those more, let's see, more specific lines going on here. And again, it's about creating the illusion of the texture rather than trying to be accurate with every single little detail. So you're just giving the indication that this is a very texturally interesting tree. I'm doing just little squiggles basically up and down the tree, just blip, 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 and moving my hand very quickly. I'm not trying to draw very slowly or whatever. This is about creating an impression. Oh, somebody else is coming in. Good. Watching a mockingbird chase a squirrel down into the ravine. Good.
I have one in the front yard. I named her Susan.
Mockingbird?
Yeah, she chases all the squirrels away.
Is that for you, Susan? Is that a Susan Fowler, Susan?
You never know.
What does that mean? Anyway, okay. So we are just making make very quick work. And it doesn't have to cover the entire thing either. You can leave areas less textured and really focusing on the points where your eyes draw first. Down at the bottom, I'll come back to this, but there's also, I want to kind of add in some Spanish moss, which I'll leave some area for, but you can also kind of create some shading. Yeah, my hand got all into there, as you can see. So it's so that's when you take your eraser and kind of give it a little cleanup. If you're left-handed like me, you end up smearing a lot of stuff, especially when you're writing. All right. And so the next tree that I'll do is this one that's kind of over there, that's leaning the other way. And it's going to be less textural than this one. So I may go back to just using the side of so using the pencil, I would use the very side of your point. And if you can hold it up and down and just kind of do some scratches. Does that make sense? Just kind of.
I like that noise.
Yeah.
It fits.
Yeah. All right, so backing up again. What time do we have?
It is 1:53.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we've been at this. So now to finish up this middle tree here, that's the darkest of the trees, right in there. I'm going to add I'm going to let it go a little bit lighter up at the very top, because really most of the action is going to be happening in here anyway, so it's kind of nice to let it fade out. And then really focusing on that place where the ground comes in. Then the last tree, this forked tree, has some nice sunlight coming in on it. If you're looking at it, yeah, I think that's it. There's some nice sunlight coming through, so you can kind of really see this area here. Whoop, this area here is darker, but this edge has some nice sunlight coming in. So I'm just going to kind of create some shadow. And you can always All right. What's also nice is I'm in the shade under this tree, and it keeps changing as the light, of course, changes, and the light on these trees always changes, so it's interesting. All right, so now I have the trees pretty well figured out, and I'm just going to add some shading to the ground. There's not a lot of tall grass, so most of it's just going to be kind of horizontal shaping of the land. I'm just kind of giving it some I'm using a pencil again. I'm using that edge of the point to just kind of create there we go. Kind of create the texture here.
Yeah, there's a lot of people.
There are a lot of yeah.
There's a two. Right?
If you're just joining us, welcome. Please make sure to mute your mic. That's hard to say. And we're kind of wrapping up right now. I'm just giving you a sense of how to treat the shapes of the land. The details like fern, you can really get lost in those details of I don't know if you can see. See what I'm doing there, but you can kind of build up these kind of textures of the fern in little places, and then you don't have to make every single leaf of the fern. It's actually better for the viewer if you don't try to draw every single leaf of everything, because that's not how we see. You know, we see in these very it's kind of like the way the Impressionists painted. We see in very brief impressions, and we sort of knit those pictures together in our minds. So what we actually perceive in the world is less detailed than we think. And if you try to draw every single detail all over the campus, it looks weird, because that's not how the eye works. And so so I'm just kind of giving some impressions of this fern here on the bank, and then to come back to the water. There's a lot to be said for just kind of creating lines that mimic the movement of like the water or the land, just allowing that fluid motion to carry your pencil. It's not about intellectualizing the movement, but actually just feeling it in your body, like how the water moves. If you can move your arm in that same way, you make a beautiful mark, and that makes it interesting. All right. So this is actually the ground that I'm standing on over here. So I'm trying to make it more grassy. Again, the grass isn't that tall. Oop, dropping things. Oop. Keep your eye on the eye on the prize. Okay. And now I just kind of fill in with my pencil some of the details in these shapes, the spaces that are left over. Going back and forth across the paper. And of course, this is just a sketch that we're doing. If you were going to do a more polished drawing, you know, taking more time and looking at more, probably using different materials. But this is a really good way to, you know, these same ideas of the composition that I was talking about with the rule of thirds and framing the ideas, that if you're taking a picture out in nature, even if you're taking photographs, the same rules apply. It's all about composition. And so whether or not you ever do another drawing, you can take those ideas out into the world. And when you're taking photographs of things, that's because everybody has a phone on their camera. I mean, a camera on their phone, and everybody's using. So using, you know, making a decent photograph is kind of a lost art, especially with iPhones now. Everybody's just taking pictures of themselves. But all right, so that is the composition